And I want to welcome tonight on stage an ICP alumni. So we're super psyched to know that and to welcome her. So please welcome Gillian Laub on stage. I'm just going to say two things before passing on the mic. Gillian conceived and produced this extraordinary project, Southern Rites, that she's going to tell us more about tonight. And that is really a 12 years in the making, original and provocative study of a certain community and its struggle. And the second thing that I want to tell you is that after the talk, there is going to be a book signing. So do stick around and yes, enjoy this next hour. Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, everyone.
It kind of feels surreal because 17 years ago, I was sitting in your seat as a student at ICP, and I remember the Wednesday night lectures being the night that I looked forward to all week, and they were just incredible. All of my friends and I would come to the Wednesday lectures, and that's where we heard some of the most incredible artists. Oh, can you not hear me? Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So, I mean, that was 17 years ago. I remember listening to Gordon Parks speak, Larry Sultan, Martin Parr, Susan Meiselas, and it was just one of the most inspiring nights. So to be here tonight is a real honor, so thank you. When I was a student at ICP, I felt like I was at home. It was kind of amazing and special to be at a place that the whole concept of ICP was built on concerned photography. And it was really great to be at a place that celebrated photography as art, visual activism, and really believed in the power of an image to tell a story. So when I was planning this lecture, I know that I'm speaking about Southern Rites. That is the main part of this lecture, but I really thought it was important for you to see where I come from as a photographer and my background and what inspired me and really how I became a photographer and how Southern Rites developed. So again, the beginning of that story begins at ICP. When I was a student, it was the building on the Upper East Side, and we were in Robert Blake's seminar class, and we were all going out for a smoke break, and my friend, Christian Nordstrom, I was one of the only Americans in the program. I don't know if it's still like that, but it was kind of amazing being one of the only Americans. And Christian Nordstrom from Sweden was doing his project on consumerism in America. And he pointed, this is when the education and the museum were in the same building, and he pointed to a brigade of women that were coming towards us. And he made a comment like, oh, what's with all these women in fur coats? And the next thing I know, all of those women are coming over to me saying, Gillian! What are you doing here, Gillian? So it was a moment that felt startling and uncomfortable, but it was an important moment because as a student, as a young student in my 20s and really trying to find my way and my vision, there was a certain sense of embarrassment or shame, and I felt like I had to cover up being a privileged New Yorker. And at that moment, it was like worlds colliding, and I felt like I was outed in some sense. So that is a moment that I really wanted to confront what it was that made me so uncomfortable, and I thought that that was very important to explore. So I will begin with the work that I did right as a student, and this is my grandparents and my aunt and uncle coming out of the limo. This is Aunt Doris. This is my grandparents having tea. And really the work is about love, and it's about celebration. This is my grandfather. We celebrated his birthday, his 85th birthday, in Florida. And the work is about intimacy. This is my grandmother and her two best friends. The work is about privilege. This is Jamie practicing for the family. This is Mom and Dad with the wedding planner, Harriet. This is Grandma and Dorothy. And ultimately, the work, I began with family, and I never stopped photographing my family, and all the work that I do is really centered around family, and ultimately, it's about pain and suffering and death as well. So this is Grandma when I picked her up for her 90th birthday. I just wanted to show you a couple examples because I know there are students in the audience and it's important to show where you get from one place to another. And I began getting commissions, and it was amazing to get commissions because it was an opportunity. Sometimes they were fashion commissions, and it was an opportunity for me to really make pictures that were in my head. So this is Nicole in the mirror. This is Nicole in the bathroom. But ultimately, this is Farah, Maya and Farah. Ultimately, these images, for me it was always about telling a story in an image, and that was the most important. But it was difficult because, of course, I didn't care about the fact that she was wearing the Versace dress. That wasn't the important thing for me. The important thing was really making an image that told a story. So another commission that I got, as an example, is I was commissioned to make a bathing suit story. So I insisted on using plus-size models, and nowadays that's kind of trendy, but 15 years ago that wasn't. So ultimately, this picture never got published, but for me, again, it was really the most important thing was to make an image that transcended the magazine page, and I felt like this one did. So it was, again, I felt so lucky because I was able to enter into so many different worlds as a photographer. So one day I'm behind the scenes with Destiny's Child, and the next day I'm in the Philippines with Imelda Marcos, or in Los Angeles with Dolly Parton. And at the same time, I'm also pursuing things that fascinate me and also haunt me. And this is way before reality TV shows existed, before Toddlers and Tiaras. And this is child beauty pageants. So there was a big turning point, and that's when September 11th happened. And I was put on assignment to photograph families. At first, I was meant to photograph families that were searching for their loved ones. And then as the days went on, it became about showing families and the loved ones that they lost. And there was something deeply, very, very, very scary about entering into a person's home that has just had the biggest tragedy happen to them. And there was also something profoundly moving and cathartic about this experience because it felt for one moment that the image was helping the people that were suffering be seen and acknowledged. And there was something very powerful in this exchange. And the following year, I really spent, most of the year was photographing families that were affected by 9/11. And I started to it was an internal time, and I realized that I wanted to explore something very, very close to my heart and something that was unresolved. And the second Intifada had begun in Israel, and I knew I needed to go there. It was a particularly violent time, and I didn't know what stories I was going to tell, but I knew I needed to go there. So I went with a journal, and it was like a road trip, a discovery really for myself. And I wanted to just kind of, at first, have, encounters, everyday encounters with people and have them write in their journal and kind of explain, their lives. And it was kind of the trying to, I didn't want to deal with the conflict at that time, in a sense. So I spent a lot of time at the beach. This is one of the journals that I love because a mom gave me the original picture of her sons, and then we posed them exactly like they were on top. But I spent a lot of time at this beach because for me this beach was kind of like a metaphor of the whole country. I almost wished that we published the contact sheet of this because it's a beach that is at the southern tip of Tel Aviv, which is where Jaffa, an Arab village, is. And it's the one of the beaches in Israel that's very mixed. And in the beginning of the contact sheet, you see these two families, an Arab family and a Jewish family, on separate sides. And as I keep photographing, and as I'm photographing, they're coming together and together and closer and closer. And then you see them playing together, and ultimately they separate. So I kind of regret actually not publishing that contact sheet, but this image is really significant for me. And this was a Sudanese family that moved to Israel. So the journal was really important, just as important as the images, and the stories kept unfolding. Like, for instance, this just looks like, happy women enjoying the beach, but then I wanted everyone to write in their own languages. So I didn't understand what was written until after, when I would get the translation. So all of the nuance of the conflict really came out in the words. So these women wrote, "We love coming to the beach. They drove an hour from Jerusalem. They wish that their husbands could join them, but it takes them 6 hours at the border to cross." So that was so fascinating to me, that here are these women that look so happy, and I learned so much in the writings. And these 9-year-old girls who are just, adorable, and I asked them how they, this is in Jaffa as well, and I asked them how they learned to pose, and their writing in simple 9-year-old writing was, "We learned to pose from our Jewish babysitter. She can't work for us anymore because of the war." So, and this is Eliza at the memorial. She, I would do anything. I was reading newspapers and finding different places to go and events, and I read about this this memorial that was happening for 3 soldiers in her unit that were kidnapped, and they were having a ceremony. The bodies weren't found, so they were calling out to Lebanon, hoping that the bodies would be returned healthy. And I just wanted to read something. So she quoted one of her favorite songs in her testimony. She says, "I have no other country, even if my land is burning. I will not stop crying out because my country has changed its face. Only a prayer in Hebrew penetrates my veins and my soul. With a pained body, with a hungry heart, here is my home." And I was also really interested in, everyone. You can't talk about Israel without people having such strong opinions, and it always ends in an argument about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. And what I was so interested in were the 1 million Arabs living within Israel with the identity of being an Israeli, but also being Arab. So that to me was really fascinating. And this is Masadi and her daughter, and I'll read you her her testimony. I'm 35 years old and the mother of 6, 5 daughters. Hanan, one of the 5, is standing to the left, and 1 son. I've worked for many years in Zichron Yaakov, the neighboring Jewish town, for the same family. They've become like family to me. We attend each other's gatherings and celebrations, birthdays, weddings, and funerals. Some people in my village think I shouldn't be working for a Jewish family. Although we live in Israel and are happy to be citizens, some think we should stay loyal to our Palestinian brothers and not be friendly with the Jews. I tell them to hate is easy, to love is hard. You have to be strong to love. And this is Madeline, and she was really interesting because she lived in this town called Akko, which was also mixed, and her best friend was Jewish. She's 18, and it was really interesting to talk to her because her best friends were going to the military, but because she was Muslim, she wasn't allowed to serve. So she did community service. This is Sayaham. She was just about to go to film school. And a lot of times I return and I stay in touch with people and I give people photos and I re-photograph them. So this is Sayaham again, 4 years later on the left, and I didn't recognize her. She said she's no longer religious because her husband thinks she looks younger and prettier like this. But anyway, just to give you context, you know, this looks kind of like a beautiful scene, but again, in the writing, you know, she's at her parents' home right now. She's displaced because she lives on the border of Lebanon, and this was when the war broke out. So again, the writing and what unfolded and what I discovered in the writing is that it was just as critical to the work as the images. This is Gil and Ben on a break. They just were on their feet for 12 hours at the border with Lebanon, and they said they were depressed because their girlfriends just broke up with them. And just to give you a little context, so basically when I'm working on my own projects, a lot of editors that I have relationships with and I work with knew that I was in Israel. So I was lucky I got a lot of commissions while I was there. So I photographed the Prime Minister, and this was a really interesting moment because this is during the Gaza pullout. And I photographed him again a year or two later at his residence in Jerusalem. And this is when the work took a turn because I knew that I had to address the conflict in a way, and I didn't know how. So I was there again for another bombing, and I decided that I had to deal with it. And I went to a hospital after bombing, and this is Kinneret, and she pretty much changed my life because I learned a lot from her. And this is a picture I made of her a year after I knew her. When I first met her, this is a picture just to show you. Her mom gave me this. I didn't take this picture. When I met her, I didn't photograph her at all because I felt like I didn't want to take something. It was such a raw moment when I met her, and I walked into her hospital room, and she had this smile, and she said, you know, I'm lucky to be alive. And she said, I feel for the person that felt so much pain in order to do this to me. And that was so profound that somebody who, I mean, look, this was a beautiful young girl in college with her whole future ahead of her. All of these pictures were also taped up around her bed. And she had everything, her whole future. And, you know, everyone is, you know, has their opinions about the conflict. And here's this woman who is a civilian and got caught in the line of fire. And she says that she empathized with the suicide bomber that almost took her life. So I get like choked up when I think about her. So then I got a grant, and I went to Israel, and I lived with her this summer. And when she was recovering, and this is her in her apartment, what was amazing is she had this incredible community around her. This was taken at 4 in the morning, and all of her family and friends would actually start their day, and I became part of this cycle. They'd start their day at sundown and stay up all night with her and sleep during the day. And this was Kinneret at 4 in the morning next to her best friend Ronnie and her boyfriend Tal. So we come back to this image of Kinneret, and it took me so long to figure out how I wanted to take a portrait of a woman and show her strength, her beauty, her power, and just how fragile she also was. It took me a while to make this, and I'm just going to read you her testimony. At the age of 23, I celebrated my birthday in Sinai with my boyfriend Tal. I was a student of reflexology and a bartender on Allenby Street. I lived in an apartment with Tal and 2 dogs in Tel Aviv. Now at the age of 25, I'm a victim of terror, fighting for my independence with many years of rehabilitation to come. I am burned on 70% of my body. I just celebrated my birthday in the park with a very select group of people. Because of this group's belief and love for me, I realized there is a reason to live, and to live at any price. I'm the prettiest girl in my class. That's a line from a famous Israeli song. I'm the girl who likes to laugh and have fun, but this girl is actually not a girl anymore. I'm a woman who is newly aware of her own power. This power exists in all of us if you are put to the test. I am as happy as I have ever been in my life. I won the knowledge to discover exactly what I am worth, to understand that although there is so much suffering in the world, there is also so much happiness and joy. I feel blessed to experience both deeply. Like my best friend in her wheelchair says, there's an angel in every one of us, and we, the crippled, are the ones who learn this. My goal is to show the world that the force of life is stronger than everything, and love, the will to live, is all that really matters. No religions, no borders, no nothing, just this. And this is Maytal, her angel that she talked about in the wheelchair. And I met a community of her friends, and this is Ayal. He was on a bus when a suicide bomber blew him up, and this was his birthday, and his parents, it was actually, I didn't know if I was going to photograph him. There was a lot of screaming going on in the room, and his parents ripped the blanket down and said to me, show the world what happened to our son. And I had discovered, actually, that they were Russian immigrants, and they came to Israel for a better life. And at that moment, for 2 weeks, he thought because he was deaf and blind, he thought he was kidnapped. And it was at this moment, they have those plastic letters that they're teaching him to communicate with. So at this moment, he discovered that actually he's in a hospital with his family, and he was in a bombing. This is Michal. She was walking home from school, and there was a bombing, a car bombing. Her best friend was killed next to her, and she lost her legs. This is a really fascinating story. Haitem had actually, he's an Arab Israeli, and he had a secret relationship with a Jewish woman, and they were in a bombing together. And neither of their families knew about their relationship until they were in the hospital together. And one of the most incredible nights that I've ever had, really, was when the Aperture published this book. Haitem and Kinneret came to New York, and we were doing a panel discussion. And you know, when I talk about Israel and the work in the Middle East, it's such a complicated, loaded subject, and I felt like this night kind of encapsulated just how complicated it is. So we needed an Arabic translator for Haitem, and so I got a friend at the UN found me a translator. It just so happened to be that the translator was Palestinian, and she was just hired to translate. She was not hired to be part of the discussion. Anyway, one of the questions Haitem answered, and she got hysterical. She said, I'm not translating that. And I was like, well, you have to translate it. That's, you have to translate it. And she said, I'm not saying what he just said. And I was like, no, please. And it was fascinating because she was so angry at Haitem because he said, after the bombing, I've never felt more like an Israeli because I felt the Israelis came and helped me with my rehabilitation, and she felt betrayed by him. And that night kind of encapsulated everything, and yeah, so. I went to the New York Times Magazine in the middle of this project because I knew that it was so important to go to Gaza and the West Bank and work with a journalist and find people that were civilians that were also injured because of the conflict. So this is Samar and Rawan, and they were driving home from a wedding, and settlers opened fire at their car. 3 were killed. Samar has 4 bullet wounds, and Rawan almost bled to death. So, this is Nicola. There was a targeted bombing next to him for a Hamas leader, and a shell fell and took his arm off. And I was really torn about this picture because it feels so aggressive. But the truth of the picture is I was photographing him and his shirt was up, and he just, I had a translator, so he explained to me what happened, but he ripped down his shirt and he said, see what they did to me? So it was really an intense moment, and the New York Times, everyone was debating, but ultimately they ran this, and I just want to read what Nicola's mother wrote. She wrote, "The occupation took Nicola's arm. My family has never been involved directly in the conflict. We did nothing to bring on this pain and anxiety. Our children have lost their childhood. Even their toys and their games are connected to the occupation. The games of Israeli soldiers opening fire, playing hide and seek in the house raids, climbing tanks are among the most popular. Is this life? Is this childhood?" And this is Murad, and he was playing with a toy gun, and a soldier, I guess it was mistaken for a real gun, and they shot at his foot. But I have to say, what was really, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, this is the honest truth, every single person that I had photographed and talked to, and they weren't angry. They weren't angry at Israelis or Palestinians. They were angry at the government. And that was, I would leave the journal with people, and I remember Murad sat with it for hours, and I had a translator, and all he wanted to do was read what the Israelis wrote. And he was saying, see, we all feel the same way. See, it's the government. And I felt kind of privileged in the sense that I was able to be this almost messenger. Kineret was so curious. All she wanted to know is my experience in Gaza and the West Bank and what they said, and she wanted to meet them. So it was, So to get to Southern Rites, when I bought my first ticket to Israel, actually, in 2002, I got a call from an editor at Spin Magazine, and he said that he received a letter from a high school student, a very brave high school student, and she wrote to Spin it was really a cry for help, like, somebody please come and cover what's going on in my town. I can't take my boyfriend to the prom because he's black. And the editor said, we have to go down. And I said, I'm there tomorrow. So the prom had already passed, but the next segregated event that was happening there was homecoming. So this is Julie and Bubba, and Julie's the sister. Anna, who wrote the letter, had since graduated. And this is Julie and Bubba. And she also couldn't take her boyfriend to her prom because he was black. And this is Anna, her sister, who came back for the homecoming weekend to kind of be my chaperone and show me around town. And this is we don't have the original letter that she wrote to the magazine, but I have all her journals, and this is one letter that she wrote to her teacher in history class. She got a 76. Basically, an outrage letter about why it's so absurd to have these segregated proms, and I just found it fascinating. The teacher wrote on the bottom in response, she writes, "In 1995, the school had a prom for everyone here at school. The blacks came and one white couple came. White parents were angry with the principal for pushing this, and his contract was not renewed. The student council had a student referendum in 1996 on having a school prom, and it was overwhelmingly defeated by both blacks and whites. It will eventually be a reality. And this was a note that a friend of Anna's sent her, kind of angry that she was trying to integrate the proms that year. So in 2002, I went down and I photographed the homecoming in Montgomery County, Georgia. And what looked like kind of just a very familiar suburban town to me, not unlike the town that I grew up in that also celebrated homecoming and had a homecoming parade. There were homecoming floats and everyone was cheering, but the one thing that was really different is that in homecoming they had a ballot that had a column for white students and a column for black students, and each student had to vote for who they wanted to be the black queen and the white queen. And then both of the representatives were on each float. And this was in the evening at halftime when the students were, all of the queens are represented here from freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior class, and they're divided by race again. So when I was in Israel, I was just haunted by what I saw there for 2 days. And I knew that when I finished the work in Israel that I had to revisit this town, and I did. So, oh, this is the reproduction in the yearbook. So I was just amazed how there was no shame. They were celebrating this, and they even have the little kids divided by race, and a white girl gave the crown to the white queen, and yeah. So in 2008, Anna Julie had moved out of the town, and I didn't know anyone there anymore. And they told me that the spin piece helped integrate the homecomings. They integrated a couple years later, and they weren't sure if the proms had integrated. So I called up the school and I said, "Hi, I'm just wondering when your prom is." And the administrator said, "Which one?" And I said, "Both, either, all," because actually in the town next door, apparently they had, there was a growing Mexican population, so they had a Hispanic prom. So anyway, they said, well, the white folks prom is this weekend, and the black folks prom is in a couple weeks. So I called the New York Times Magazine up, and I said, I have to do this. And I got on a plane, and I went, and I first met, I was kind of like a school stalker because I wanted to find students and meet students, and really, I went a day before the prom, so I didn't have much time, and I met Harley, and she was a junior, and the juniors planned the prom for the seniors, so she was the chair of the white folks prom, as they call it. And I asked her if I could follow her and getting ready, and she said, yes, but I don't want this to be about race. This is not about race. And I kind of, got a little nervous. I wasn't really prepared for that. So I followed her. At the same day, I met Kiki, and this is a snapshot of Kiki's. And Kiki was amazing. She was like dancing around and singing. I met her in the parking lot. I'm like, why are you so excited? And she's like, I'm going to be the first black girl to go to the white folks prom. And her best friend Dylan here, this is them at homecoming before, her best friend Dylan, his girlfriend had just broken up with him, and he invited Kiki to go with him to the prom. And she was most nervous because she didn't have a dress to go. So I said, please ask your parents for permission. This is historic. I want to follow you, being the first black girl to go to the white prom in Montgomery County. And she said, great. I gave her my motel number, and so I was trying to figure out, the time with spending half the day with Harley and half with Kiki. Well, the night before the white folks prom, later that night, I get a hysterical phone call that woke me up out of a sleep, and it was Kiki, like hyperventilating that she was disinvited to go to the white prom because Dylan's parents didn't approve of her. So she said, please come back. My prom is in a few weeks. I'm bringing my boyfriend. And I said, absolutely. She said, my father's a cop, and he'll protect you. it happened to be that right after I was with Harley, a parent had recognized me from 2002 and pretty much lost her mind, flipped out and said, "I know why you're here, go back to where you came from, you know, mind your own business." And the next thing I know, a cop and a sheriff came to our table at all the students after going to the local photo studio, go to dinner before prom. And a cop, I was at the local restaurant, Ruby Tuesdays, and a cop and a sheriff came to my table and said, "We would like you to go back to where you came from because we're not going to be able to protect you. People here will take the law into their own hands if they don't like what you're doing." And I said, "Are you threatening me?" And they said, "No, this is a warning." Next thing I know, my tires are slashed, and I left town the next morning, and I felt so defeated. I didn't make it to the white prom. Here I was presenting this story to the New York Times Magazine. They send me down, and I'm totally defeated and get chased out of town. I was mortified and also scared. So I go back, I return a few weeks later for Kiki's prom, and this is Kiki in her yard before the prom. This is Kiki and her best friend, Shaniqua. This is Sierra and Kent, and it was interesting because I noticed that there were a couple of mixed couples, and I asked them, and I was like, "Wait, but this is the black prom," and they were like, "Everyone's invited to the black prom." So Sierra and Kent were a couple, but I asked her if she took him to her prom, but she wasn't allowed to take him to her prom. So, yeah. This is Lacey, the prom queen. And when I was driving down the street, I noticed, this just caught my eye, and this is the main road, and I pulled over, and Shelby and her grandmother had set up shop. They sell everything Confederate flag, bikinis, I mean, everything. Dog sweaters, and they, love to tell me the virtues of the Confederate flag and how it's so misunderstood and the history is so misunderstood. So they gave me a formal history lesson. So then I realized that this is a story that I don't care if people are chasing me out of town. In fact, it made me even more I needed to tell this story because obviously there was something that people were trying to hide, and I wanted to really kind of understand what this was. So I went back without a camera for a few weeks and I went back to Harley and her family. And I was very straightforward. I said, "You know what? This is about race. I want to understand how this is still going on." And a part of me did feel like a naive Northeasterner, and I really just wanted to understand. So I started taking audio interviews from the people that would talk to me. So Harley said that I could definitely attend the prom, and I got complete access, I thought. And the prom was on a Friday night. The white prom was on a Friday night at the Vidalia Community Center. Soon after I entered, I was kicked out again. So the prom is in that building across the street, but I set up a little mobile studio there, and anyone that cared to be photographed or interviewed came across the street. So, before I was kicked out, this is one of the last images that I took in the white prom, but I was lucky that there were certain families that did talk to me and open up to me. What was amazing, though, that it felt like this particular class was very, very close. So I couldn't wrap my head around this. So the black students had their prom at the exact same place, the Vidalia Community Center, on Saturday night. And I was with the black students on Friday night when they went to see all their friends all dressed up. And I was with them when we all got the door slammed in our face. And it was that moment that I realized how deep the pain was and how much, and I was shocked, but they were like, "Oh yeah, this is what happens, this is it." And the fact that they were so accepting of it but knew it was wrong was so deeply painful. So this is Kiki, of course, and she had already graduated, but she was going to cheer on all her friends, and this is her cousin Kira, who was graduating, and she introduced me to Kira and all the students in her class. So this is the following night at the Black Prom, and this is Angel. And it was really fun, and I had a wonderful night, but it was sad to see that none of the white students actually came and cheered on their friends the next night. And Skyla was one of the students that her boyfriend was Barry, and she went to the white prom the night before with him but wasn't allowed to take him. This is Nyesha, the prom queen. Nyesha and Kyrie. And this is Felicia, who I absolutely love. And, you know, the students were really, the black students were really excited that they finally felt like they were the year that was going to try and make a change by talking to me and opening up. But they were really fearful, actually, that they wouldn't graduate. So they made me promise, and I went to their graduation 2 weeks later. They made me promise that the audio slideshow and the piece wouldn't be published until after graduation. So I let the Times know, and I went to graduation. And although I don't think that this is really a great photograph, I think it's a really important photograph because it shows just how small of a class we're talking about. These are the students who all grew up together since kindergarten, whose parents were trying to separate them. And it was just crazy. So the Times was great, and they respected the students' wishes, and a lot of them came back to my motel room after when the multimedia piece went live at midnight. So, you know, usually I think their Sunday magazine, it goes live on Thursday, but they held it till Friday just for the sake of the students. So these are some of the spreads from the piece in 2009. So basically, there was, thankfully, kind of a shitstorm that happened when these images were published. I think that the town was surprised about the backlash that they received. And, you know, I laugh because I'm thinking back, my husband would say, okay, if he saw a phone call from Georgia, he's like, please don't answer it, please answer it later. It was a bit of a crazy time after this got published, but I knew that I needed to go back, of course, and I heard that the town was finally coming together and they were going to integrate their prom. And I also knew that I needed to further the way to tell this story. I felt like there were images of kids in prom dresses looking beautiful, and I was collecting interviews, and I felt like filming it would kind of help show the nuance, and I had no idea how to make a film. So I had a year to figure out. So I took a class, Media Storm, and I really worked hard at learning, teaching myself how to shoot. And I went back and I went in front of all of the students and administration, the superintendent, the teachers, and the parents, because finally the whole town is coming together, and they all had to vote. And I had to go in front of them and make a speech why I should be allowed back, because I was this person that drew such negative attention to their town, so why on earth would they let me back? So I told them I cared about this town, I cared about the students, I wanted to be part of seeing this community grow and change. And they voted that I could come and film and photograph. So this was the parking lot of the first integrated prom. Unfortunately, there was a parent of power who didn't care about a vote and ultimately had me taken away in handcuffs. But there was nothing, I didn't do anything, so I wasn't arrested because there were no grounds, but I was just intimidated. And then, of course, at the end of the night, I snuck back in. And when people were leaving, I was trying to grab them and ask, I just wanted to know what it was like to attend the first integrated prom. So I also felt like the prom was obviously something, it was a symptom of something much larger. And it was time to really start photographing and filming around the community. So these are some images that I started. Yeah, so basically, the onions are really, this was, it's Vidalia onions. I grew up eating Vidalia onions, and suddenly the Vidalia onion took on a whole new meaning to me. It was kind of surreal being at this festive Vidalia onion festival while I'm in town, photographing segregated prom. So this was Sunday church. And everyone is really religious, so I spent a lot of times in churches and around churches. I stopped on the side of the road because I thought that there was a protest going on, or I didn't actually know what was going on. So I saw these two men walking up and down this one street, and I stopped and asked them. They were allowed to take a few-minute breaks in between the hours, and I asked them what was going on, and they said that instead of doing time, they chose to walk with these signs. So I had never, this photograph is called Public Shaming, because I never knew that this practice existed. He was found, the man on the left was, a nightclub had closed, and he couldn't use the bathroom, so he urinated on the side, and he got arrested and charged with disorderly conduct. And then it was bizarre because this man was taking cell phone pictures of them as if they were like part of a circus act. So this is Kiki and Justin at their 2007 prom. And this was Justin's senior portrait. And again, the community was divided. And at the time, this wasn't in the news at all. And I only really knew Kiki, and I got to really know the Patterson family. And, all they wanted was justice. All they were hoping for was justice. And the story that happened was basically Justin and his brother, Siobhan, were invited over to a girl's house late at night. Apparently they had met on Facebook. And they were doing what teenagers do. And the father, Danielle's father, woke up. He heard something. He woke up, and he took the gun next to his bed that he sleeps with and went into the room. And when he discovered the boys, he threatened them and had them sit on the couch. It was to their understanding that they would be killed. And Siobhan says, when you see an older man with an older white man with a gun, you run for your life. So they made a run for their lives, and 3 bullets were shot, and 1 hit Justin and killed him. So I didn't know Norman, I didn't know the other part of the story, but I knew the pain that the family was in, and the pain that no one was covering it in the media. So they made these fans, they had rallies, they made T-shirts, and this is, finally, over a year later, I was kind of stalking the New York Times in Atlanta, and I said, you have to come down. There's a young, unarmed black boy that was killed, and no one's covering it. So they came down and covered the sentencing, because there was a plea bargain. And actually, the DA said that they made progress, that a case like this even made it into the judicial system. So So it was really a tragic time, and at the same time, it was Siobhan had his senior prom. And it was so crazy because, you know, I'd known him from covering the proms, and I didn't think for a minute that he would go to his senior prom, but you can see on his face, you know, you could see the tragedy there. So, you know, it felt so crazy because finally I was actually invited to come photograph and film the integrated prom. Finally, I wasn't being chased away. But yet it was really, bittersweet isn't even the right word, because there was a tragedy that just took place months back. And this is Nyesha. You saw her in the photographs in 2009. She was the prom queen in 2009, and she was salutatorian of her class. And her guidance counselor, she got a scholarship to go to the local Baptist school, and her college counselor said, really, the best future for you is to join the military. And she said that she was worried about going to the school. She didn't want to be the only black student. So she went to the military, and then she got pregnant, so she was discharged. And, you know, Nyesha and like a lot of other people, I would come back and interview again and photograph. So it was, again, she felt such pride that the proms were integrated, and she felt like she was a part of making that change. But yet she says, I remember, in this town, we take 1 step forward and 2 steps back, because she was also mourning the loss of her friend Justin and hoping that the family would get justice. So this is Amber and Reggie. She's one of the reasons why I was allowed into the prom, because she's the daughter of the hair salon owner, so I knew her for many years, and she was on prom committee, so she kind of convinced everyone that I was okay and to come to the prom. And she was the prom chair with Brooke, her best friend, and Brooke and Quan were going to be the first couple, the first mixed couple to go to the integrated prom. The first integrated prom, there were no mixed couples. So this is the parking lot of the integrated prom. And this was inside. It was fun. And this is prom prince and princess dancing. So.